For many, the third generation of Cartoon Network was the last one truly worth watching. But the truth is, that's not accurate. The fourth generation wasn't bad. Summer Camp Island, Craig of the Creek, Infinity Train, Mao Mao, OKKO, these weren't bad shows, and I'm tired of pretending they were. So, with this video, I'll be the first person on all of YouTube to stand up and defend this generation of Cartoon Network, because I'm done pretending I don't like Summer Camp Island. If you're watching this and have no idea what I'm talking about, let me give you some context. Cartoon Network can be divided into 5 distinct generations, each representing not just an era of cartoons, but also the overall aesthetic and vibe the channel radiated during that time. The first generation spans from 1996 to 2003. While the channel had existed since 1992, this generation marked the beginning of Cartoon Network as a creator of original content. Before this, the channel relied solely on classic cartoons like Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry. But this era introduced the cartoons, which established the identity that Cartoon Network held onto for most of its history. Well, probably not anymore, but it did for a long time. The cartoons brought us shows like Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Ed and Eddie, and Courage the Cowardly Dog, which laid the foundation for the channel's success. With these shows, the channel not only created iconic characters, but also began to explore different tones and genres. They opened the door for studios and animators to experiment with new formats and styles, something that undoubtedly helped the channel become what it was. For many, this was the golden era of Cartoon Network, but that's up to each person to decide. The second generation of Cartoon Network spanned from 2004 to 2009 and is often considered a transitional phase. Following the success of the first generation, Cartoon Network began to introduce more variety into its programming. This era brought us shows like Ben 10, a series that introduced a much more mature narrative than anything the channel had aired before. Ben 10 paved the way for other shows to focus on character development without hesitation, setting a new standard for animated series on Cartoon Network. It also marked the beginning of programming that didn't underestimate its audience's intelligence, offering more serious and mature storylines, something that, sadly, might not be as present today. Other notable shows from this generation included Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Flapjack, and Chowder. This era had a city-themed aesthetic, where characters were often seen interacting with each other, a concept that, even today, I still find incredibly epic. The third generation spans from 2010 to 2015 and is often considered the rebirth of Cartoon Network. Before this era, the channel was in a really bad place. This was when Cartoon Network's executives decided to experiment with live-action shows, something that didn't go well. Thankfully, a few incredible cartoons came along to save the day. Adventure Time, Regular Show, and The Amazing World of Gumball proved that cartoons could be both entertainment and art. But it didn't stop there. These shows normalized exploring complex and emotional themes like friendship, love, and self-identity. This inspired future generations of series to do the same. For many, this is the true golden age of the channel, not just because of the iconic trio of shows I mentioned, but also because of the incredible variety. To give you an idea, it wasn't just those 3. There were other series like Steven Universe, Mad, Uncle Grandpa, Total Drama, Ben 10, and countless more. I agree that it was the best era of Cartoon Network, at least in terms of variety. The rotation of programming was really good. During this time, minimalism also reached Cartoon Network as they went from this logo to this one. The channel also adopted a very minimalist style for its bumpers, with the most noticeable characteristics being the colors blue, pink, and yellow that would come to define this era. Now we can move on to the fourth generation, the most underrated and undervalued of all. Although many don't believe it, the fourth generation did continue the innovation of the previous generations, but in a more subtle way, because we can't deny that Craig of the Creek, Summer Camp Island, OKKO, and Mao Mao are unique series. They bring new concepts and stories and are genuinely good. These shows proved that even though the channel was going through a rough patch, it could still produce good and original content. Unfortunately, they weren't given enough support. This was partly because it was also a transitional period, marked by the shift to streaming. While neither Craig of the Creek nor Summer Camp Island reached the same level of popularity as shows like Adventure Time or Steven Universe, they did manage to keep the channel's creative and experimental spirit alive. And here I want to defend one by one the series that I believe were genuinely good from this generation, starting with the one that's probably the most hated, Craig of the Creek. Craig of the Creek came out in 2018 as a show aimed at a younger audience, since its protagonists were also kids. The series followed the adventures of Craig and his friends Kelsey and JP at the creek. The creek itself is a whole story on its own because it was a place where the kids were, in a way, self-sufficient. They had their own rules, clans, and even jobs. Who wouldn't have loved to play in a place like that when they were a kid? But what fascinates me even more is the idea of the trading tree, a place where you can trade a couple of batteries for food. It's simply epic. The series is hated mainly because it was one of the few Cartoon Network shows that tried to represent the LGBT community in a way they thought was natural and organic.
A secret keeper?
Yeah. And I have a secret I'd like to share. I like you, George.
Secret Keeper, would you like to hang out sometime?
Yeah, yes, sure.
But, of course, we're talking about kids. I understand the intention, but they could have done it with other characters, I don't know, maybe with Craig's brother. Still, I don't think that should diminish the great show it became. People criticized it, but they never really gave it a chance. Summer Camp Island is another amazing show for me. I just love the style and the vibe it gives off. I know it might seem super childish to many, but I don't feel that way at all. Not only does the series have really great lore, but it also had episodes that tackled mature themes, especially Oscar's evolution. The series started in 2018 and ended in 2023, with 5 seasons. I'm not gonna say that Cartoon was unfair to it, but I do believe the series could have been more successful if it hadn't been for everything that happened with Max and the exclusivity issues. But in the end, the series managed to wrap up its main storylines, and that's what matters. This was the only show from this generation that I actually sat down to watch, and that truly interested me. It's a shame it's not as appreciated by the general audience, and that it's often labeled as just a children's show. Another show that marked this generation was Infinity Train, which I don't even consider a cartoon. It's a masterpiece, at least the first season is. Once again, this was a show heavily affected by all the Max issues, but not only that, it may have also suffered from trying to be overly mature and complex. After all, it aired on a channel that was also showing Total Dramarama and the Ben 10 reboot, so the contrast was harsh. Plus, according to the creator, the show was originally planned to have 8 seasons, but it only ended up with 4, and that's because fans started putting pressure on them. I'll always stick with the first season, where the protagonist was Tulip. For me, that season holds up just as well as Over the Garden Wall. It's really that good. It's a shame what happened to it. The 4th generation also brought us other great shows like OKKO and Mao Mao, but I think those deserve their own video. Of course, this generation wasn't free of bad shows either. Total Dramarama and Victor and Valentino were also around. And before anyone gets mad, I don't mean to say they're awful, but they're just not on the same level as the others I mentioned. Also, the dubbing for Victor and Valentino is questionable. The 4th generation marked a crucial turning point in the channel's history because it was a period when digital platforms began to dominate content distribution, pushing traditional television to the background. Shows like Craig of the Creek, Summer Camp Island, Infinity Train, and OKKO were victims of this shift, as many of them relied on Max for distribution, which limited their reach and prevented them from reaching as wide an audience as the shows from earlier generations. However, what they did manage to do was prove that Cartoon Network still had the ability to innovate and bring unique, high-quality stories, despite what many people believe. We are now in the 5th generation, and the future doesn't look promising. The production of original content has drastically declined, and corporate decisions have affected the entire legacy of the channel, prioritizing streaming while leaving behind its identity as the home of cartoons it once was. Although this shift reflects the evolution the industry has undergone, it also highlights how special the 4th generation was for staying true to creativity and the essence of the channel during a time of transformation. Now, more than ever, these shows deserve to be remembered and appreciated for what they represented in their time, even though many are still not ready to do so.
I put the new 4Gs on the G. I came into the bloody houses underneath.